Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and I'm here as always with my good friend, colleague, and co-host Jim Gurley. And yeah, we got another interesting pregame where the where we ended up on was a topic that we've talked about talking about for a long time, but I think that there's a certain sensitivity to it that we've had, Jim, I think more so than I, but I think we've convinced ourselves that it's a worthy topic, and it came from a bit of self-reflection, which is part of our wheel in the middle there, the self, and it goes out to one of the five categories, which we've called at some point in time people, but also relationships with others. And the next spoke out on that wheel is men and women and what we found ourselves talking about today. And we've talked about this topic a lot off the air together, so we had some fun with it. But it's basically the difference between men and women, specifically in how they communicate and what drives their particular nature, the nature of man and the nature of woman. And we had some chuckles and we had some things where we have to be maybe a little bit more careful than we'd like to be about because we're not to this the point of this is not to offend anybody. Really, the point of this is really to just open up a conversation about something that stand-up comedians have been making fun of the difference between men and women for hundreds of years. There have been books written on it, the Venus and Mars book. I mean, the idea that there are distinct differences between men and women is to me it's a truth, and I think that in this world today we've stopped celebrating those differences and we've made them somehow divisive, like something's wrong with him or something's wrong with her. So hopefully we'll get some interesting observations out of this. And Jim and I agree on some of this and we disagree on some of it. So Jim, take it away. Good luck.
Yeah. Well, Mark, again, just to remind everyone about our framework of these five areas of our life, no particular order, but our life's work, our profession, our well-being, our relationship with money, our relationship with others, our relationship with ourselves, our mental health, our physical health, and well-being. And this one, probably, like everybody always says, the most important one, right? And that's our relationship with others. And then we have two categories, and we separate that intentionally, man and woman. It's a very different relationship. But you could also say this is a continuation of our 2026 series, right? We kicked off the year with talking about these different frameworks in episode one, and then we went on to even our own stories, taking ourselves through the framework or the wheel of life is what we refer to it as. And so today is something um, was inspired by what's in the center of everything is that's our self, and then hyphen self-awareness. So I think you had some self-awareness about relationships, and then the word self-reflection came up, and that evolved into self-reflection with the relationship with somebody that's special to you. And now we're going to talk about something that I said I'd never talk about because it's a complicated subject, and that is women and the differences between man and women and so on. And because we both have daughters, adult daughters, and we both had mothers, of course, and sisters and significant others, I think it's timely. But Mark, but before we kick this off, I just did a cut and paste. Like I always like to start things off just to get a definition of what self-reflection means. So if you could just read that in the chat, I think that'll
Yeah.
kick this conversation off. And then if you could share your recent experiences, and I have a small experience or story as well that I'll share with some interactions recently with a divorce attorney. It happens to be a female. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
if you could
Well, yeah,
read that self reflection,
I
that when you get a
will. I will.
chance.
Just before I read it, I want to just say that, this thing started in the pregame where Jim and I got on the Zoom call and he always just asks me, "How you doing?" Or
Hmm.
something along those lines. And I reflected in that moment and thought, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. And then I think you said something like about what? About everything or just some things? And I said, no, I think a little bit of everything. And I had this, I've had some recent experience with my girlfriend and my daughter that were really interesting conversations. They didn't cause arguments, but there was a level of disagreement and some emotion came into some of these topics that I didn't anticipate. So that's the impetus behind the topic today. And Jim and I have been threatening to talk about the differences between men and women
Yeah.
for about 4 years. So I'm glad we finally came around to it. Good for you. But
Yeah, but I think the word that I came up with was tension or contentiousness,
yes,
and I
yes.
said that turns out to be a very um, normal. What's, I'm trying to be so careful not to say the wrong word, right?
Yeah, don't
A
be.
dynamic with women and men. So,
It
but
is.
yeah,
But
there's tension, contentiousness. There's that is part of the dynamic, not for in a bad way. It's just the way it is. It's the different psyches of a man and a woman. And I mean, full disclosure, I've done a kind of a deep dive on Carl Jung's writings about the psychology, but specifically the dynamics or the nuances of femininity and masculinity. That's
yeah, no, it's
his
it's
thing. So
fascinating.
so
It's
I'll
it's
share a little bit of that.
yeah,
But yeah,
we'll
if you
come
could
back
kick
to
kick,
that.
kick off self-reflection, because I think
Yeah.
this applies to you
Self-reflection
or
is
all of
the
us. Yeah.
yeah, self-reflection is the intentional process of examining your thoughts, actions, and motivations to increase self-awareness, improve emotional intelligence, and foster personal growth. It involves stepping back from daily routines to analyze behaviors, why they occurred, and their outcomes, to align actions with values. Key
Yeah.
techniques include journaling, mindful meditation, and structured questioning.
Yeah.
Yeah, that hits home. It's I think it's a healthy exercise, and I think that, one of the things that I've said it to you a few times, that I think part of the division in the country right now, much of it is political, and there's probably other components of it, but I think it wasn't maybe 10 or 15 years ago that I heard for the first time people asking questions like, what is a man and what is a woman? And it seems to me that if we still have people that are asking those questions and don't have a binary answer, you got two options, then we have confusion. And confusion causes anxiety, and anxiety causes argument. And we don't resolve things very well when we're in that emotional state. So I think that how that happened, why that happened, and what it's done to us, it's confused a lot of people, and that's created a lot of division. So I think it's not just the discussion of the differences between men and women, it's the evolution of those differences and how society is treating them now. I think
Mhm.
it's particularly confusing to young men as I see it from my perspective. But before I
Mhm.
pass the baton back, I want to contextualize where my opinions come from, because
Mhm.
I had good relationships with my grandmothers. I had good relationships with a few of my aunts. I have a sister. I had a mother. I have an ex-wife. I have two very strong, competent,
Mhm.
capable daughters. And I have a girlfriend now going on 7 years who I am madly in love with and have a lot of respect for. So I'm
Mhm.
not speaking from a position of isolation, but
Yeah.
these are only my observations. No, no conclusions coming today.
Yeah, no, great stuff. Again, what's what we do here at the Men's Imperfect Men's Club. The imperfection is the perfection. It starts with self-awareness. So I like that you start off with this self-reflection because it absolutely encompasses the self-awareness, but also, examining our thoughts, updating, having conversations as a man and how this applies, particularly at different stages of our life. Because, again, back to context, our 20-year-old self versus our 30-year-old self and our 40-year-old self is going to be very different than our 50-year-old self or 60-year-old self. It's just important to know that that changes, not just from a women's perspective, but also as a man and what we seek. I think often women think it's just always about sex. There's no question, as a man, we are always ready to go. Most guys are, I should say, in general. I mean, I'm interested in your opinion. I think it's less important as you get older, and you want companionship, and you want, connectivity, all the different things. So it's not just sex, but often that seems to be where women have a misconception that it's all we want is sex. Well, we
Hey,
want intimacy.
either they have one or we have one, but there's a misconception in there somewhere. I think that what we were talking about, without getting into people's private lives, is basically that, I think women in general, and I would love to hear a woman's opinion on this, they need to be in a particular emotional state, and we don't. And I
Mhm.
think
Yes.
I think that's just true. I don't
Yeah.
think it's good or bad. I think it's just true. But as I've gotten older, and certainly in the relationship I'm in now, it's very important to me that if we're going to have the physical intimacy, that it needs to come with you being in the right emotional frame of mind, or
Mhm.
it's a rather much less enjoyable experience. It's not worth my while. Honestly, I wouldn't want to do it to her, anyway. So I
Yeah.
like a cooperative approach to it. But, if she were to say to me, you always want to have sex, I'd be like, yeah, doesn't matter what frame of mind I'm in. I think that's because I'm a guy, I'm not
Mhm.
hiding behind that.
Yeah. But something I've learned, again, particularly through these Carl Jung writings, was women have different stages of what they want. So they're very complicated. I say this in the most uh, respectful way. They're much more complex than us in
Hmm.
terms of how they think and how they view the world. But back to your point about in order for a woman to have an attraction to a man, the first thing that she needs is some level of security. She needs to feel secure
Hmm.
uh, in order to create some attraction, that she trusts you enough that she's secure enough to move to the next step. And then at that point, either through humor or making her laugh or other things, there could be a level of attraction or sexual tension. But I think that's the other thing. By nature, tension is a big part of how um, is what drives them subconsciously. There's a level of tension, whether it's sexual tension, whether it's just tension in general. That's very normal and it's subconscious. So again, trying to
The
be
other
very
thing,
general.
yeah, the other thing, Jim, is I think that they have a tendency, like this all came up because I was sharing with you my frustration over something very minor that happened yesterday. I
Hmm.
was laughing at something on my phone, and my girlfriend asked me what was so funny, and I said, I'm looking at an AI created video of Donald Trump in his blue suit and red tie facing up LeBron James in his Lakers uniform, and he's throwing threes down like he's better than LeBron, and I thought it was hilarious. And she said something to me along the lines of, "Why does everything have to be polarizing?" And I
Hmm.
looked at her and I said, and I thought about it because I don't want to make a big deal out of a little deal. I could have completely dismissed it, but it kind of pissed me off. So I said something like, there's nothing polarizing about that. It's funny. I had no political thought in my mind, not an iota, right? I just thought that juxtaposition is funny. And you read into it. And it didn't last long, but it just feels like the tension is and as you get into a relationship, you've been married for decades, that
Hmm.
along the way you go from the early stages, which are predominantly romantic, to latter stages when everything's on the table. You know everything about her. She knows everything about you, and there needs to be adjustment along the way if you're going to make it long term. And these things, I mean, most importantly, this is why I'm not the only reason my marriage fell apart, but we just stopped talking about stuff. And I'm not going to
Hmm.
let that happen. And my girlfriend is not inclined to not want to talk about stuff. So I don't believe
Hmm.
that's going to be a big deal. But I think
Hmm.
it also speaks to you got to pick your battles too, because it's like I don't need to win that argument. That's not even an argument. I thought it was funny. She saw it as something else. On to the next thing, you know.
Hmm. Yeah, but you're right. Communications is a huge part of any relationship, but particularly a marriage. And often when marriages break down, it's for the top three reasons, right? One is communication. You stop communicating. Two is money, and three is sex, or maybe sex in no particular order, depending what it is. But those are the three reasons that relationships end. There was a lack of communication or a lack of understanding. Yeah, I've been married, like you said, for many decades, and there's one of the reasons, and it's kind of become an annual thing. We had this pretty deep conversation the first of the year. I don't want to get too personal in the details, but it was probably one of the most significant ones in terms of just sharing my thoughts about uh, being married for that many years and where we're going at this stage in our life. And in my full disclosure, in the most respectful way, you've heard me say this before, I really believe that the social construct of a marriage is a broken model. It's a broken system. And I say that not by just my opinion, but by the statistics, because we know that more than 50% of those marriages are do not go the full distance. And my hypothesis or my point is maybe they're not designed to go the full distance, and that the social construct of a marriage back in the day, I'll let you decide, based on your religious beliefs or whatever that is, that especially when we had a shorter lifespan, that you were intended to be with the same person. And the conclusion was, and again, that's why I appreciate the conversation that we had at the beginning of the year, was it's not realistic to believe that one person can satisfy all your needs. That's just not a practical thought. And
Well,
I'll add to
yeah.
that by saying it also has a lot to do with the different stages of your life. So when you're in your early ages, I absolutely believe that marriage is important and monogamy is important, particularly in your 20s and 30s and 40s. But as you get older and your child and you're not you can't have more children and your priorities shift, I just don't think it's a practical thing. I think a marriage license should be like any other license, and that it should have a expiration date, and you have to either renegotiate or really, it's a in the end of the day, it's become a legal document. Is what it is. It's a business agreement. It's not a marriage
Yeah.
agreement, and we have to be more realistic about what that looks like. So, as you know, if you have particularly these days, a prenup is not uncommon if you get married a second time or later on in life. And I think it's time to revisit the whole social construct of what a marriage license is in terms of a legal document versus the, let's say, traditional religious things. So that's a whole other conversation. But I'll
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I
openly
think,
say that in terms of
we've
monogamy, yes, I think that as men, we are not designed by nature to be monogamous for the rest of our life. We have desires for that. That's a very natural thing. I know you
well,
feel differently, and I'm interested in your thoughts about the.
yeah, it's probably a little off the beaten path because it is a conversation unto itself. But we agreed to disagree on that, and I think that it's really, to me, it's more about, the discipline required to make sacrifices to get other things that you want to get out of life, whether it's children or a really good friend that develops maybe romantically. But I think I think what you do once a year at the beginning of the year is a fabulous idea, by the way. I think that probably could save a bunch of marriages if people would do that. Because I really, in spite of my criticism of my ex and all her foibles from a mental health standpoint, really the switch went off and we stopped talking about stuff. So you can't. And I
Mhm.
think that my point on how I speak with women is different than how I speak with men. And I'm not shy about that. And certainly when you're in a romantic relationship, that's different than a platonic relationship or a familial relationship. But nonetheless, my experience with women is, and I think this is part of their nature, you and I, when we were kids, boys fought. We were physical. We played sports. We knocked each other around. We pushed each other over. We punched each other in the face.
Yeah, you'd
That's how
settle
we
things.
that's how we settled our disputes.
Yep.
And women don't have that ability, nor do I believe they want that ability. I don't.
Mhm.
Most women don't are not interested in fighting at all. Some are, but not many. And so they have developed this set of verbal skills and emotional skills in lieu of those physical
Mhm.
capabilities, almost as a defense mechanism.
Mhm.
And I wish we had a female guest on now for a third opinion on that. But
I'm sure
I've
we could get one that has
I,
plenty of
I've
opinions, but
I've
but
seen that. I've seen that my whole life. I've observed
yeah.
that my whole life. Not a
Let,
good,
let, let
not
me
a
give you
right or wrong thing.
Yeah, let me just give you a different take on that. About the differences between men and women in terms of evolutionary differences, and it starts really with going back all the way back to the Stone Ages and how women are very concerned about belonging to the tribe, staying in the tribe because their survival depended on it. By nature, we're a little different in that by nature we're designed to go hunt and come back, but not necessarily. So they care about what other people think. They by nature want family. They want their family around. That's very normal. Again, I say this in the most positive way. We need both. I'm a huge believer in femininity and masculinity, and the importance of having both of those. The polarity and the dynamics is healthy. So there is a difference, I think, as far as the drive of a woman wanting to create the family, want to care about staying in the tribe. In order to stay in the tribe, you had to to be of value. You had to help each other. That comes very natural to women, and men are a little more individual because we would go out and hunt or farm, and that was our human evolution.
Well,
So
one of the things, Jim, sorry to interrupt, but one of the things that I think there's a lot of confusion in our society about this topic that we're talking about. I know there is because we're arguing about it all the time,
yeah.
and it comes up. But my daughters, for instance, I to put words in their mouth, I would say to something you said earlier that part of what a woman wants in a man is security, and another way of saying that is someone who will protect them.
Hmm.
But now women, particularly the group of women that are in their 30s and 40s, maybe even their 20s, they would probably counter that by saying, "Yeah, but I don't need a man. I can do all this shit on my own." And I think
Hmm.
that's, while it might be true in some instances, I don't think it's a wise angle to take on life. I think that I want people that are with I want to hang out with guys that if shit goes down, they're going to be right behind me. They got my back. They're going to jump
Hmm.
in. I want a guy like that, you know? So
Hmm.
it's like
Hmm.
why is it so important to do everything on your own?
Hmm.
And the reason that they're husband and wife that have children is that that's a two-person job. I can tell you because I did it by myself for a long time. So I think that desire to be protected is nature, is DNA. That's in their DNA. But
Yep.
that also in the confusion of that is, yeah, but I want to be able to do everything myself. And my question to that would be why?
Yeah, yeah, I'll give you my take again for what it's worth, and it's just an opinion, but it is based on social constructs, particularly in our lifetime over the last 50 years, because there's a clear timeline, and it really starts with birth control because the agreement started to change, and that about that same time with birth control was the feminine movement, right?
Hmm.
Equal rights for all for good. Which, by the way, my mother was an RN, so she worked. So I was familiar. My wife was an executive level corporate career. So I've benefited from the women's movement and from equal rights. So obviously, both of us, your daughters, my daughters, all benefited from this progress. However, like everything, it comes with a cost, and that
Hmm.
cost is that they were, for good or for bad, um, they believe and they were told you don't need a man for anything. Well,
Yeah.
that turns out not to be 100% true. We need each other,
Yeah.
and I think it's created kind of an unfair situation for women because there's this thing called hypergamy. If you're familiar with the term, it has different meanings, but there's also the opposite of hypergamy is hypogamy, which is the opposite of that. Hypergamy is that women by nature are attracted to men with a higher status. But the reality is women are making, in many cases here, particularly here in the Bay Area, sometimes more than men. They're the college graduation rate and even college uh, overall populations is more women than men in colleges. So we've got to quit. There's not enough men that are at a equal or higher, let's say, social status than they are, which makes it very
Well,
difficult because by nature they're attracted to that. So that's progress, but this is also the result of that. And again, I say this in the most positive way. This is what progress looks like. It's how we frame it.
well,
But
it's not, but it also has to be something that we're willing to talk about because, I
yeah.
was having a conversation with my daughter, as I told you the other day. She's got some challenges personally, and it led us into a conversation. I said, "Oh, honey, among other things, that's kind of what my book is about." I said, a lot of men are confused today, and I think that it dawned on me through doing some research because it's supported by research, right? Lots of studies over tens and 20, 30, 40, 50 years. The Harvard study of men goes back to the 30s, the 1930s. They have 100 years of data on this, what makes a man happy, and
Mhm.
among other things. And so I said, we had this feminism came into play, and I think she took offense to me even bringing up the word and
Hmm.
maybe even presumed she knew what I was going to say and perhaps didn't listen because it was the opposite of what I said. And it was, which
Hmm.
is interesting unto itself, but it was feminism came out and the world said men and women need to have the same equal rights. And everyone said, well, not everyone, but most people said, that sounds like a good idea. And if the definition
Hmm.
of feminism is that men and women have to have equal rights, then I'm a feminist. Okay. But what we didn't
Hmm.
do is we didn't pull men aside and say, well, this is what this is going to mean to you, right? That
Hmm.
conversation never took place. And so,
Hmm.
and what we've done, and you can see it on TV, the dads in these TV shows they get emasculated. They're in the
Hmm.
commercials, they get emasculated. That's an overreach of a good
Hmm.
idea to kind of what you were suggesting. And I think that
Hmm.
what it's done, particularly to young men, and there's data to support this because rates of depression and anxiety and suicide
Hmm.
skyrocket. And I believe 80% of suicides are men, right?
Hmm.
And so most of the people in prisons are men. Most of the people that die in wars are men. So there's all
Hmm.
kinds of data to support something's going on. And I think
Hmm.
this is what we're talking about is at the core of that, which is why can't we discuss this without the women assuming things and the men assuming things and just say, and then let's acknowledge what we've talked about so far, which is human nature. Their nature is
Hmm.
to nurture, ours is to protect and support and fight and defend and secure. And it's just like everyone has evolved over the centuries to modifications of those, but at the core, I think everyone still has those. And a lot of the stuff that we're doing today, in my opinion, with men and women, is we're trying to deny what is our nature. And it's confusing.
Well, it's particularly confusing at different stages. That's what I'm saying. Let's just talk about our daughters because they're in those childbearing years where, by nature, they want children. I think that's fair to say that the majority of women, in their 20s and 30s and even 40s, would like to have children. That's part of it. But they're also told that they can have a career. They have to have an education. I feel sorry for women to some degree because there's a tremendous amount of pressure to have it all and do it all. That's just not realistic. And then the other thing is, if they're building a career or even an education, those are some of the most valuable years that they have in order to reproduce. And so I think
But
that's what we're talking about. And in fairness and again, this is all social constructs. This is this is nobody's telling us what to do. This is what politicians do to get elected. This is what marketers do to sell products, and sadly to divide us in different news cycles. So I yeah, full disclosure, I have a huge amount of resentment to certain political parties and movements because I think it's driven by um, uh, fear and separation and victimhood, which is not good for anybody in
I
the long
think
term. And women feel they've been victims, and they have been in some cases. Um, so yeah, there's a lot there, and it's depending who you're talking to and when you're talking to them, they'll have some very strong opinions.
Yeah, well, I think you just, I think you have to be open to conversation and you have to be open to disagreement. And that's at the core of a lot of our division as well, as people just want to
Mhm.
shut disagreement down. And, I always use the analogies of science. I mean,
Mhm.
science is never
Yeah,
over.
it
It's
doesn't lie.
never over. It's investigation. It's a constant level of investigation. And I wish there was a way that we could minimize the confusion around this men versus women issue because it shouldn't even be men versus women. It should be all of us together collectively trying to figure out what was in everyone's best interest. And at the end of the day, Jim, you know this as well as anybody. The only thing that's important in a relationship between a man and a woman is what that man and that woman agree on, right? Or
Yeah,
agree
yeah.
to disagree on. So society really
Mhm.
shouldn't have a place, and we've allowed it to have a place. They don't belong in that conversation. They don't belong in the bedroom. That's between the
Right.
husband and the wife. And
Yeah.
I'm a
Yeah,
libertarian when it
society's a
comes to
big
that.
place. I'll share a short story. This is just was it last Friday night? I was getting some dinner, and was sitting at the counter, kind of bar, and so struck up a conversation with the two gals next to me, and so we're just talking. I believe they were, yeah, that's right. Both of them were divorced, and so we were just talking about kids and stuff. They were a little bit younger than me, and their kids went to the same schools as my kids, and um, one was a divorce attorney, a
Mm.
woman divorce attorney. Very pleasant and very impressive woman, by the way. So not at all, um, divorce attorney, as like in a bad thing, in a good way. And I brought up, I said, "Oh, interesting. What a perspective that you have every day, because there's a lot on the line, and a lot of emotion." And I shared with her. I said, my hypothesis on marriage licenses and how there should be. And she just thought that was a concept she'd never heard before, but made a lot of sense, right? And something else came up was, it wasn't that it's not designed to end the relationship. It actually would probably retain the relationship, because there's a deadline, and it's not uncommon for a woman after she gets divorced to start going to the gym, or in the guy too, right? All of a sudden they get fed and they get, well, maybe some face work done or whatever it is after they get married. If they had done that before the divorce, I should say before the divorce, maybe it wouldn't have ended. So it just creates a deadline, and it creates an energy that if you didn't have that in advance. And then also, as a divorce attorney, it is a business contract. Marriage is as much of a business relationship as it is a, say, romantic relationship.
Yeah.
And that's just sharing that with based on life lived experiences. You're entering a business agreement as much as you are a romance. If you get a little bit of both, you're fortunate, but you will go
Yeah.
for different stages in your life where that original contract. I mean, I got married when I was 20, dated for 5 years. Excuse me, I met her when I was 20, got married at 25. I'm a very different person today than I was when I was 20 or
Yeah.
25. So
Yeah.
to hold somebody, and I mean this, equally, mutually, that to hold to for one person to meet those needs, um, 3 generations later is just unrealistic. It doesn't mean that couldn't happen, but you have to have, say, a recalibration, a real understanding of what your needs are going forward. And then the shame of marriage often is just based on past religious or family traditions, and so much it's driven by the shame or all the different things. And yeah, just you can obviously, you've been through that, and share your perspective with
Yeah, I'm proud of the fact that I have not, my opinion of women has not been tainted at all, and it
Mhm.
because I understood the unique nature of that circumstance, and I've never attempted to blame anybody for anything because it doesn't serve me, it doesn't serve anyone. But a little on a high note, I just recalled this short story, and we can wrap it up. I was listening to Dennis Prager's talk show a couple of years back, and he had a rabbi on, and he's Dennis Prager's a theologian, and he had a man woman hour, 1 hour a week on his radio show. He'd just talk about the relationship between men and women. And this woman called in and said to the rabbi, "Can I ask you a question?" Something like that. And the rabbi, a very well respected man in his area as well, she said, "Well, I wanted your opinion. My husband, we're struggling right now, and and he's not giving me this, and he's not giving me that. I don't remember the specifics. It was kind of like, things that drive arguments in marriages." And the rabbi just paused and said, "Would you like my opinion on that?" And she said, "That's why I called in." And he said, "What if you were to take a completely different approach and ask, what can I bring to the relationship for him?" And I think what you'll find over time is if you take that approach, you will probably very quickly get everything that you want. And I just thought that was fabulous.
It's great. Yeah.
That's not just men and women, that's all of us, but
Yeah,
particularly men and
no,
women.
it's a great way to wrap it up. And then also what you're chasing in a new relationship, like I said, often can find in the one you have, but you have to be willing to go outside of maybe the existing relationship in terms of meeting your needs. I'm not talking about, other people, but just in general. You have to have other things going on. You can't depend on one person to satisfy all these different needs in your life. That's just not realistic. And I'm
Yeah.
fortunate because that's, you know, we both agree on that, and it makes that conversation a lot easier as far as expectations and the amount of time and resources that you have left, especially as the hourglass gets smaller, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
you're running out of
It's
time. So,
Well, I think we pulled it off, Jim. I think we
all
pulled
right,
it off. All right.
sounds good.
Till
Until
next
next
week.
week. All
See
right.
you.